Is Breath of the Wild better than Tears of the Kingdom? Naturally, this is a question I've been pondering since Tears of the Kingdom released. As a sequel, it's pretty hard not to make comparisons with its predecessor. And now that Nintendo has confirmed that they're not planning any DLC for Tears of the Kingdom, this feels like the right time to look back at both fully complete games and compare them side by side. Obviously, this is just my opinion, so I'm sorry in advance if you disagree with me, but we're gonna go over 5 topics: abilities, dungeons and bosses, world design, replayability, and overall content / DLC. I'm not going to go over the story because for me, they're pretty equal. Let's start with abilities. In Breath of the Wild, you get Magnesis, Cryonis, Remote Bombs, and Stasis. In Tears of the Kingdom, you get Ultra Hand, Fuse, Ascend, and Recall. For casual players, I think Tears of the Kingdom takes the cake here, with Ultra Hand being a clear standout. Having the ability to build all kinds of constructs and manipulate all kinds of objects really works well with the physics engine of the game, making for a super fun experience that's unique to every player. For players who are looking for more long-term play and replayability, I think Breath of the Wild wins solely due to the fact that we have amazing ability-based glitches like Wind Bomb, BLSS, and Stasis Launch. Even excluding glitches, remote bombs were great, and I definitely miss having them in Tears of the Kingdom. I guess I'll briefly talk about champion abilities too. Breath of the Wild wins that hands down. Better shield, better lightning attack, a revive instead of a redundant cannon attack, and I think the only one Tears of the Kingdom wins on is Tulin's Bust because rockets basically replace Ravioli's Gale. Honestly, I think the only thing missing from both games is some aquatic life. Can you imagine how cool it would be if we had some sharks in Tears of the Kingdom? Speaking of sharks, let's talk about Surfshark, who were kind enough to sponsor today's video and give me some money, which helps me to be able to keep making videos like this. So thank you, Surfshark. For those of you who don't know, Surfshark is a VPN service that allows you to do a bunch of awesome stuff. Like lately, I've been hankering to watch The Office, but sadly, it's no longer on Netflix in the US. With Surfshark, you can change your virtual location at any time, so I just switched over to Canada where The Office is still on Netflix. And if you're worried about security or privacy, Surfshark has you covered. Surfshark actually has military-grade encryption that helps prevent unsavory individuals like Ganondorf from stealing your information. But guess what? We're not done yet. It gets even better. If you use my promo code botw on Surfshark's website, or you could just scan this QR code, or you could just click the link in the description, you'll get 3 extra months for free. That's insane. Oh, and by the way, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so this is basically risk-free. But you're not going to need to use that because who would want to go back to a Surfshark-less life? Not me. That's for sure. Once again, if you're interested in Surfshark's VPN service, use my code POTATO on Surfshark's website, scan the QR code, or click the link in the description. Thanks, Surfshark. Let's get back to the video. Now let's talk about the dungeons and bosses. This is where I'll probably piss some of you off, but for me, Breath of the Wild wins just barely. When Tears of the Kingdom was about to launch, I was super excited about the prospect of having like traditional Zelda-style dungeons, but I feel like it didn't really work out quite right. There were some standouts for me, like the Wind Temple and the Lightning Temple, but the absolute freedom of Tears of the Kingdom just doesn't work super well with the traditional Zelda dungeon style. There's just way too many ways to cheese the dungeons, most of which could be done with just a hover bike. Breath of the Wild's dungeons definitely weren't amazing, but I feel like they were more consistent, a little harder to cheese, and did a better job of making you use your abilities to solve puzzles in kinda satisfying ways. It was also fun that you could like adjust the dungeon from within the map. That added a nice little extra element. As for bosses, when I first played Tears of the Kingdom, I thought the bosses were vastly superior to Breath of the Wild's. But after beating them a few times, I started thinking,
perhaps I treated you too harshly.
While Tears of the Kingdom's bosses were once again more traditional, and once again had some standouts like Colgera and Queen Gibdo, they were overall worse in my opinion. Not only were they too easy like most of Breath of the Wild's bosses, but most of them were also just like pretty disappointing. Aesthetically, Tears of the Kingdom bosses take the dub, and Ganondorf is definitely a better final boss fight than Calamity Ganon. But for me, Thunderblight Ganon alone is better than all 5 of the Tears of the Kingdom dungeon bosses combined. Plus, Breath of the Wild's bosses actually like fit into the story, and Tears of the Kingdom's just were there. Now let's talk about world design. When Breath of the Wild released, its world design was revolutionary. It felt perfectly crafted down to every pixel, letting you move around the map with just enough freedom to create your own path in a very satisfying way. And if you played the game quite a bit and wanted to get a little more out of your experience, nothing was more satisfying than moving around the map with a chain of wind bombs that were just hard enough to perform that it left you feeling accomplished. When Tears of the Kingdom was about to release, we got the exciting news that there were going to be 2 new areas to explore, the Sky Islands and the Depths. But sadly, both of those new areas just got kind of repetitive and boring. It's especially sad because you can see the missed opportunity in the first 10 minutes of the game. If there were more Sky Islands structured like the Great Sky Island, it would have been so much better. But instead, the majority of the Sky Islands ended up just being repetitive shrine puzzles, and the Depths just felt like busy work. The returning overworld from Breath of the Wild was fantastic once again, and did feel a little fresh at first due to some of the changes, but it just lacked that amazing magical feeling you got during your first playthrough of Breath of the Wild. Not to mention the fact that Ultra Hand constructs like the hover bike kind of hurt the exploration and pathing of the game because you could just fly straight to your destination instead of trying to find your own path like in Breath of the Wild. Now for the topic I've been looking forward to the most, replayability. For me, Breath of the Wild takes this without question. As someone who has streamed many playthroughs of Breath of the Wild and a few playthroughs of Tears of the Kingdom for challenge runs, replaying Breath of the Wild is just so much more fun. There's quite a few reasons for this. The first reason, like I mentioned in the last category, is that using movement glitches like wind bombs, BLSS, and stasis launches to move around the map is just so much more satisfying than using a hover bike again. But aside from glitches, you've also got better mods to make the game more interesting, and if you're doing a challenge run, it's way more convenient in Breath of the Wild. Tears of the Kingdom's dungeons are just too tedious and usually have a long lead up, whereas Breath of the Wild dungeons are pretty easy and quick to get through. And if you're going for a boss rush, it's fun to just loot up Hyrule Castle, dive straight into the boss rush, and get by on skill alone. But in Tears of the Kingdom, it's just so tedious. You have to follow this long path, fight multiple waves of basic enemies, and then fight 6 bosses back to back before you can get to the final boss. It takes longer, and it feels like it takes way more prep time. And my final reason is that Breath of the Wild's bosses can be hurt by most things, which makes challenge runs a lot more exciting. Tears of the Kingdom's bosses have so many specific weaknesses that you don't have the freedom to fight them however you want. Instead, you're forced to fight them as they intended you to. In Breath of the Wild, you have the freedom to approach the bosses with almost any strategy you want, and usually they'll work. Finally, let's talk about overall content and DLC. And yes, this is because I'm salty about the no DLC announcement for Tears of the Kingdom. And yes, I agree with many of you that Tears of the Kingdom is already a fantastic game, and it doesn't necessarily need more content to feel finished. But there are some things that baffle me about this no DLC decision. One of the biggest complaints about Breath of the Wild was that it was too easy, so they added Master Mode to make the entire game more challenging, the Trial of the Sword to give you a more intense combat challenge, and a way to upgrade the Master Sword, which many people wanted. And they also gave you an entire extra dungeon and boss that was different and more challenging than most of the bosses in the game. Oh, and a motorcycle, in case you wanted another fun way to traverse the map. For me, the biggest oversight in Tears of the Kingdom is the lack of Master Mode. It was such a popular addition of Breath of the Wild that I honestly thought they were going to add it to the base game for Tears of the Kingdom, but they didn't, and now we find out there's not going to be any DLC. So any hope of Master Mode, any kind of difficult combat challenges, more Ultra Hand items to build new creations, and most importantly, windows for your house, all those hopes are dashed. I'm not saying the game isn't incredible already. I'm just saying I feel like they could have added some extra stuff to make it feel more complete and add some much needed replayability with Master Mode. But I am very excited to see what they come up with next now that they revealed that they're completely done with this version of Hyrule. I know all of this seems like I'm very much Team Breath of the Wild, but I assure you that's not entirely the case. From my perspective, as someone who makes content from these games, Breath of the Wild is just better for me. But that may not be the case for you. I think if you're more of a casual gamer and you just want to get 1 or 2 playthroughs out of your modern Zelda game, then Tears of the Kingdom is the better game for you. It has better base abilities, better dungeons and bosses, at least for the first playthrough, and it is overall an incredible game with amazing features, an absurd amount of content, and unrivaled player freedom. But if you want to keep playing these games and get a little more out of your modern Zelda experience, then Breath of the Wild is the way to go. Glitches, mods, DLC content, and a more streamlined approach to dungeons and bosses make this a much better game for longevity. I mean, just look at the release of both games. 6 years after Breath of the Wild released, there are still tons of people playing and enjoying it, but it's only been like almost 5 months since the release of Tears of the Kingdom, and I'm already getting comments from people saying, wow, people are still playing this game? I think Breath of the Wild has the staying power, and I'm okay with that. Once again, let's thank Surfshark for sponsoring this video. If you want to try Surfshark out for yourself, completely risk-free, just use promo code POTATO on Surfshark's website, scan this QR code, or click the link in the description. Thanks, Surfshark.